and welcome back to the Anthropology podcast. So today is an episode with somebody who is not an anthropologist, but in fact a doula, and somebody who was actually my doula. So in today's episode, I talk with Maddie McMahon. She's an author, activist, campaigner, and started two important organisations. One is Developing Doulas, which is the sort of doula training school, and also Maddies Miracles, which is a breastfeeding support line, which is online on Facebook. So this recording was done in Sheringham in 2025, and so you can hear my firstborn son in the background. And today I'm introducing this episode with my second born son, who's 3 weeks old, strapped to me right now. And sadly, Maddie actually passed away on the 31st of May this year, so just 2 months before my second son was born, which meant she wasn't there with me at the second birth. So this is a very special episode for me, and hopefully is for others who know Maddie, and for anyone who doesn't know Maddie's work. There's many resources you can find to read more about her thoughts. Yeah, but the reason it's here on the Anthropology podcast is because through Maddie, I learned that the concept of the doula was really coined by an anthropologist. So that's where our discussion starts. But then we cover a range of topics as we sit together in her back courtyard in Sheringham on the North Norfolk coast. So you might hear a few seagulls in the background, as well as my son playing with the mics. So it's another discussion of issues pertaining to women's health, women's bodies, motherhood, child rearing, and the benefits of cross-cultural knowledge. And actually many doulas seem to be quite inspired by what they read and learn from anthropologists about how things are done in cultures across the world and not just Europe. So I hope that there is something to take from this that's interesting for everybody, and at the very least it's a bit of a memorial piece for Maddie, who I missed very dearly. So sending love to all of Maddie's friends and family. And here is the episode. Thanks for listening. So Maddie McMahon. Mm-hmm. So is that right?
Yep.
And where's that from?
Ireland.
Oh, right. Nice. So you are a doula extraordinaire. Mm-hmm. And also a doula educator, mm-hmm. and also a writer, mm-hmm. writer of two very good books that I've read.
Thank you.
And we're also the magical doula of me and my child, along with Kaz Sales, wonderful mm-hmm. Kaz as well. So I have a huge debt to you for this beautiful child that is in my arms, and also been a sort of second doula to my second pregnancy as well, that never quite came to its full conclusion, sadly, but yeah, very helpful and important support through a miscarriage, which actually was another example of how important it is to have women with women's knowledge around.
Absolutely.
Because despite miscarriages being so common and happening to so many women, basically we don't know anything about them until they happen to us. No. And we're completely in the dark about them.
And all alone.
Yeah.
So often.
So I think both of those are examples of how important doulas are. So it's really nice to have an opportunity to talk to you today about doulas, but also about anthropology a little bit mm-hmm. too. And so, yeah, the first question is, can you tell us what a doula is?
So a doula is a really ancient role. We provide practical, emotional and informational support to women and birthing people through their pregnancies and during labour and through the postpartum period, and often just hang around and have a general parenting support for many years afterwards sometimes. But we've been around since the dawn of time. there was always other women who would be around those new parents, as well as the wise woman, the midwife, who would be providing a bit more of the clinical care. It was always more social, emotional support from the women of the community.
And so basically they wouldn't necessarily obviously have always been called doulas, and I'm sure they have different names in different cultures, or maybe they don't even have names. My child is now on top of the microphone. But yeah, essentially, you know, the women have always existed to be supporting other women and providing knowledge, passing on knowledge. And perhaps they would have been women within a family or just generally within a community in the past.
I think the word doula was first coined by an anthropologist, actually, a woman called Raphael in the 1970s.
Right.
She was actually writing a book called The Tender Gift, and it was about breastfeeding. And she had noticed that the mothers who were more likely to reach their breastfeeding goals had other women around them who had breastfed or were breastfeeding. They didn't necessarily need to have lots of knowledge, scientific knowledge about how breastfeeding worked, but they needed to have positive regard for the activity.
Yes.
And to be there as an emotional support and to validate that activity.
Exactly.
And so, she noticed that mothers were doing this for each other and sitting by the side, being a companion of that new mother who was just learning to breastfeed. Wow. And she took the word from the ancient Greek. It would have been a servant woman in an ancient Greek well-to-do family who would have been the one whose job it was to be that supporter and serve the woman of the house when she was having her babies. And obviously within Greek culture or Greek history there was a long tradition of slavery, and a lot of those servants would not have been paid.
Yeah.
It would have been indentured servants or slaves. So that means that there's a little bit of controversy around the term. Some Greek doulas don't call themselves doulas. Some Greek doulas do, and they say we're reclaiming this term. So some people will call themselves birth keepers, or there's lots and lots of terms. I don't really have any emotional investment in being called a doula. I didn't really call myself doula for many, many years. I would just end up in birth rooms, and if a midwife assumed I was her sister, I didn't feel any real need to disabuse her of that notion. Just a woman who gets asked to be around other women when they're having babies.
Yeah. Just a support. Okay. So, the anthropologist that coined the term.
Yeah.
Do you think she coined it thinking she would sort of carve out a new market? Because in a way, for those people who do come across the term doula or learn something about it, which happened very sort of randomly for me, I think a lot of people don't know what a doula is, and possibly don't even know it's an option to them or available to them. Obviously, there's the question of affordability as well, but I think quite a few doulas offer what you do is like support for people who don't necessarily have the means, and donations from those that do. Before she coined the term, was there already a sort of market where you could, pay someone to give you that support?
Not to any great extent, I don't think. And certainly Raphael's book was more about infant feeding than it was about birth support.
Interesting.
But two researchers in that same decade really started researching the effect of a non-clinical supporter in the birth room on the outcomes of labour. How long that labour carries on and how satisfied the mother is when she looks back on her birth experience, and how healthy she and her baby are at the end of the process. And they started really studying the effect of a female supporter in the birth room who is not part of the hospital staff and, crucially, not part of that woman's existing social circle.
Oh, interesting.
So there's something about the effect of doulas that is slightly different because we didn't know each other before. And I think maybe, if we'd already been really good friends, how do we get a dynamic where it's all right for you to talk about you
and just order you around
all the time and order me around, and me not think, Olivia's not listening to my gripes. So there's a different dynamic when you're not already friends, I think.
Interesting.
So these researchers, Klaus and Kennel, they started researching that. They found that there was an enormous difference in terms of how many women ended up having cesareans, for example, goes down significantly as soon as you have some kind of lay companion in the room with you. And maternal satisfaction goes way up.
Even postpartum, after birth.
So postnatal depression rates are lowered. It's a really significant impact. So they wrote a book called the Doula Book, and they were in a name
once more time.
Klaus and Kennel.
And are they
what type of researchers
are they? Just sort of social science, maybe, or clinical or something?
Maybe, yes.
Okay, we'll have a look. We'll look it up. And they wrote a book called the Doula Book.
And from that, really, the doula movement in America started. 70s and 80s.
Interesting.
And then in about, I think, maybe 2000, 2001, in the UK, the wonderful obstetrician Michel Odent called a meeting. I think he put an advert in a newspaper, in really old-fashioned way of getting the word out. Saying, do you get asked to go to births? Do you help out around the house when a woman's just had a baby, but you're not a midwife? Come to a meeting at my house in London on this date.
And he was French, wasn't he?
Yep.
But obviously living in the UK.
He was a really famous obstetrician. He had...
obstetrician. Can you just quickly say what an obstetrician is?
An obstetrician is a doctor that specialises in maternity care.
Right.
Often obstetricians are also gynecologists.
Right.
They're womb doctors.
Right. Got it. Okay.
And he had popularised the use of water.
I remember,
during labour when he was working at a hospital in France. And so he called this meeting, expected a handful of people to come along. I think about 50 women turned up at his house. And that first meeting was really the inaugural meeting of an organisation that is now called Doula UK.
Can you remember roughly what year that was?
I think it was 2001.
Oh, that's pretty recent.
Yeah, I joined in 2003, so I was like the second generation.
And so you met him?
He was who trained me as a doula, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So in my day, there was only one doula course. Him and his partner Liliana, who was a doula, he ran a doula course.
Yeah, oh God, I didn't know that. Yeah, because my encounter with doulas in the first... actually, it's funny because, yes, my encounter with doulas has always got something to do with anthropology. The first time was driving from a conference in Aotearoa, New Zealand, with a colleague who was based in the States. She told me that she was also a doula, and if her PhD in anthropology didn't work out, then she'd go back to being that. And I thought, what's a doula? And then she explained it's kind of like a midwife, but it's more the sort of social, spiritual, emotional side of it. So she accompanied people through birth, which I thought was just amazing. And then that was it. I never thought about it ever again. And then probably 2-3 years ago, 2023, I was doing research in Norwich with Sufi Muslims, and met a woman at Eid prayers who told me that she was a doula, and I was pregnant at the time. I just found out I was pregnant. And I said, what is a doula again? And then she explained, And then she said, yes, immediately she said, yes. And I was trained by Michel Odent. And even though he was the one that introduced the water into birth, he actually didn't think, it wasn't his invention that people should give birth in water. He was just saying that water was good for pain relief, but he didn't say that babies should be born in water.
No, he didn't expect that to happen at all.
Yeah.
Women just refused to get out. And then the baby started accidentally being born into the water, and he realised that actually it was perfectly safe.
Yeah, as long as they don't go back in, as almost happened with our baby, Senna.
Yes.
He came out unexpectedly out of the water and was about to shoot back into it.
Yeah, we had to catch him, didn't we?
Yes. He was caught by you, actually, I think. And
I think me and the midwife together.
Yeah, the midwives. And he had the umbilical cord wrapped around his shoulder and his neck a couple of times.
He was tangled up. Yeah.
So, really fascinating. I hadn't actually realised that the whole kind of concept and movement is so sort of contemporary. I suppose it sounds like it probably was going in tandem with the 1970s sort of feminist movement in general.
Yes.
And maybe a bit of pushback against the medical system and the sort of patriarchy that was taking place in the medical system in the Victorian era.
I mean, certainly in the UK and in the US around that time, 1970s, 1980s, there was a big move to herd women into the hospital to give birth. In 1974, here in the UK, we had a government report called the Peel Report, written by Lord, whatever he was, John Peel, I think. And his recommendation to the government was that 100% of women should give birth in hospital, and within a decade home birth had all but disappeared in the UK, and no partners were allowed in the hospital with you. So women had gone from traditionally giving birth in the bosom of their families. Their husband may not have been in the room with her, but he would have been in the house. He would have been there to shepherd the other kids and be there immediately after the baby was born and bond with his newborn, to being relegated to the pub to wait until, or pacing the corridors of the hospital. So women were lonely during childbirth. And of course, you probably, now you've had a baby, you understand that actually if you're feeling loved and in a place where you feel safe and unobserved, and you have some sort of privacy, actually you can manage your own pain levels pretty easily. But put you in a room that's stark and clinical with strangers, without anyone you know or love around you who knows what you need and can tend to your emotional needs, actually the pain is off the scale.
Right.
And together with the hospital idea that you should lie on your back to give birth, so your pelvis can't open, which makes it even more painful and more likely that your baby's going to be in a tricky position trying to get born through bone rather than soft tissue, meant that women, instead of emotional support, were crying out for the support of drugs to take away that torture. So I think the whole doula movement came at a time when women were being very poorly served, and were looking for a different way of doing things. And I think childbirth really had been a bit of a forgotten part of the feminist movement. 1970s feminism was all about being like men, going out to work, cutting the apron strings, not being stuck at home with your brats, putting on some trousers and going out there and fighting for equality. And so motherhood had been a bit of a forgotten part of that process, and to an extent still is in feminism.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I'm not no expert on 70s feminism, but I guess my sort of very basic understanding is that, yes, the sort of liberal feminism was all about education, economic empowerment, pushing women out of the house, not being stuck in the domestic sphere, having been kind of forced into the domestic sphere as part of the Industrial Revolution. But at the same time, there was also the sort of socialist feminists or Marxist feminists saying that social reproduction, the domestic work should be considered work, and we should have wages for housework and those sort of movements. But yeah, where the body comes into it, what's the kind of spiritual, emotional, physiological stuff that goes on in a woman's body, and how that also is part of social reproduction. Yeah, that's something, I guess, based on my kind of formal academic training and, you know, the exposure I've had in feminist protests or social movements, you know, maybe like Reclaim the Night March and something like that. There's a lot of stuff that we have thought about bodily safety and security and autonomy and those sorts of things. But I can't think that I've actually ever really learned anything about birth or pregnancy or early motherhood or anything like that from feminist texts or feminist movements.
I mean, obviously, I'm not dissing the movement around bodily autonomy.
Yeah.
It's crucial, but I think the volume has been around our right to not have the baby, which is brilliant. Absolutely, really, really important. Yeah. But when we're deciding that we do want to keep the baby, whether that was a planned baby or not, actually, I never learned anything about my rights as a pregnant woman and a birthing person, or afterwards as a lactating mother. I knew nothing at all until I became a doula. And I'd been a strident, active feminist since my teens, did women's studies at university. No, didn't learn a thing.
And this was obviously before becoming a mother yourself as well?
Yeah.
So you were a doula before a mother?
I became a mother first, sorry.
Okay.
Yes, so I became a stepmom first, and then had my first child, and then it was after my second baby that I did my doula training. So I'd been through this kind of massive learning curve of, oh my God, I knew nothing. I knew nothing about how my body worked during this process of pregnancy, birth and lactation. And I knew nothing about my rights. And those rights, now I was starting to think about, surely I know I have rights over my body if I didn't want to keep the baby. Surely I have the same human rights as a mother. But I couldn't find anything about that. Nothing written at all back in, it was 2000 I had my first child. And so it was a real journey of discovery, becoming a doula, and beginning the slow understanding that women are the boss.
So, if you're going to sort of give a little synopsis of what you see as some of the most important rights of the mother, you know, in that process as a pregnant person, I suppose not just the mother, but maybe parent is also an important term, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Not everyone having a baby, growing a baby, is going to identify with the word mother.
Yeah. So, what are some of the most important rights, do you think, that you sort of learn as a doula and you try to teach people?
I think, first of all, it starts off with this care that the system is offering you is an offer. There's nothing that you have to do. You can avail yourself of the opportunity for surveillance of your pregnancy if you so choose. And you can decide where you're going to give birth, how you're going to give birth. And obviously, Mother Nature has a say in that to an extent. But understanding how your body works, and therefore how you can tip the scales in your favour to get the kind of birth experience that your mind and body are telling you would be conducive to your mental and physical health.
Yeah.
You can do that.
Yeah, and obviously there's no guarantees.
No, exactly.
I think in my sort of process of choosing a doula, I really wanted to make sure that I found somebody who both understood the importance of or the value of having a home birth if it works out, but also isn't so sort of ideological or dogmatic about the hospital. That if I ended up in hospital, they wouldn't be able to work alongside the midwives. Yeah, because I think I had heard there can be a bit of sort of tension sometimes between midwives and doulas.
I think maybe in years gone by, when we were a very new concept to a lot of midwives, and they didn't really know what our role was, what the remit, where the boundaries were. Right. And so I always used to think to myself, oh gosh, if I was a midwife, I'd be a little bit discombobulated.
And maybe a bit
I mean, being here, what is she doing? Is she judging my care? And, you know, does she think she's a midwife? What's going on? So I would always spend a lot of time with midwives, just making sure that, you know, we each understood each other's role, and she was reassured that I wasn't going to tread on her toes. And I think over the years, you know, we've done a good job of that, and most midwives now have positive experiences of working alongside
and understand
doulas.
What the doula does. And I mean, you guys were a great team. I was so lucky, had an awesome midwife, and
we
did all worked really well together.
We did.
So that was the first thing I was saying about choosing a doula, was about the medical. Oh, what was the other thing I wanted to say? I think one of the, I don't know, we touched very briefly in one of our conversations about the book Matrescence by Lucy Jones. We've said that she's essentially saying that there's almost been too much of a push in the other direction for natural birth and home birth, and now that's almost become a sort of pressure on women's shoulders that they should be able to do this natural birth, and they should be able to hypnobirth their way through labour and all these types of things. And if you don't manage to do that, then you've almost failed yourself.
You're a terrible failure.
Yeah, because you've had intervention and you've had painkillers and all those things. And so she sort of argues, based on her own experience, that there's been a mistake to emphasize nature so much when actually there's a really important role for the medical system to play. So and I think we sort of touched on that the other day, and you had quite a interesting reaction, and I'm trying to remember now what it was.
Well, it makes me feel very sad, actually, because we don't apply the same logic to talk about birth politics that we do to any other area of health and well-being. I don't think anyone would take it very seriously if we said, well, we put too much emphasis on being able to walk on our legs or breathe unaided. You know, people should have the right to choose to use wheelchairs or oxygen. It doesn't make any sense to me. Yeah, when our bodies are able to express themselves the way that they were designed by millions of years of evolution, optimal health outcomes are achieved. Now, that doesn't mean that there's any judgment of the people who need or want some help. We just know that overpopulations, if we're talking public health, then natural birth and breastfeeding leads to optimal health outcomes for parent and child. You'd be up and running again quickly if you had a boring birth with no intervention, no recovering from a cesarean and all of that. You wanted to just get back to your life.
Right.
So why would you say, oh, cut me open and give me 6 weeks of recovery time?
Yeah.
When you didn't need to do that.
One of the things that I have found so interesting as, you know, part of learning more about doulas, reading some of the literature when I was pregnant, and thinking a bit more about all of these things, is how much women have been disempowered kind of psychologically and socially and detached from their own bodies.
Yeah.
You know, I think
That's
there's
part
been
of the problem.
Yeah, there's been a process of alienation, I feel, that's happened as a result probably of the, you know, very successful introduction of medicine having reduced deaths in birth significantly, and you know, increasing the life expectancy of babies in birth, whatever. So we, you know, obviously medicine's played a very important role.
Really important role, but we can't. We've had a generation of women going through extremely interventionist births that can be incredibly traumatic.
Yeah.
And rather than blaming that system,
Yeah.
we blame ourselves. So we say our bodies are deficient. They fail a lot. We need to be rescued by the doctors.
And also
birth is dangerous
birth
and
is
awful,
painful as well.
and we need to go into hospital and have lots and lots of drugs.
Yeah.
Give me the epidural,
Yeah.
because birth is awful. Everybody I know
Yeah.
has had a terrible birth. And they all go in there saying, I want to give birth vaginally, naturally. And then they end up in having cesarean anyway. So I might as well just book an elective cesarean, because our bodies are rubbish. And that's the narrative that has played out for the last 3 generations or so. So it's cascading down the generations. Mothers are telling their daughters, oh, I had a dreadful time, I needed a cesarean, you probably will too, our pelvises are too small, or whatever nonsense they were told by the doctors. So we found ourselves in this really tricky situation now, where we have 2 opposite problems happening simultaneously. We have too much medical intervention happening too soon.
Yeah.
So women go in to hospital wanting a natural birth, but that medical intervention is foisted on them because they don't know their rights, and they don't know how to talk to doctors to make informed decisions. And doctors do not have the skills to be able to ensure that women are giving proper informed consent to these interventions. And so too much of this medical intervention is happening too soon, and because all the women who really do need the medical support are often getting too little of it too late.
Because the resources are stretched.
Yeah. So really good example of how health professionals need such a wonderful skill set. They need to be able to know how to facilitate natural birth, just like your midwife did when you were in labour with Senna, but also to be able to pick up on the signs that you might need support from doctors too.
And when just to listen, isn't it?
Exactly.
I think, like, going back to the question of sort of birth trauma, in my sort of antenatal groups, I'd say pretty much almost every woman in my group, so let's say 10 women or something, had a negative experience. And essentially because they had at various points not been listened to.
Exactly.
And
that's what's happening. It doesn't really matter what kind of birth you want, or what kind of birth nature is dictating you need for an alive baby. Women are not being listened to, and that makes doulas and feminists and activist campaigners extremely angry. There's something wrong with the system, and I think it's reductionist to bring this down to, oh, you know, we're being sold this terrible lie that natural birth is safe, and making it divisive like that. It's not about mode of birth. It's about women being safe, babies being safe, and women being heard, and their choices respected. And for all of our health professionals to have the skills to help us navigate through this incredible adventure safely, not just for our bodies and our babies, but for our brains as well, to come out not traumatized.
And I think basically, you know, in anthropological terms, we'd call that agency, you know, that women should feel they have agency, whatever birth they want, whatever they choose, and whatever decisions they make, even in the, you know, the last minute, that those are respected and heard, and that the people around them are supporting in that, you know, including their husbands, their families, their midwives.
That's right, exactly. And I think if we're talking about this whole natural birth at all costs nonsense that is a narrative that is in the news and, you know, in the media at the moment, blaming midwives for selling us the idea that natural birth is a good thing to do.
Right.
Actually, what it's missing is that if medical intervention was so wonderful, why are our stillbirth rates not going down? And why are our maternal death rates going up?
Wow.
And why are we way down the league tables of, you know, of safe birth outcomes in the world?
In the UK, wow, I didn't know that. And also postnatal depression.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
such a big
It's an
issue.
epidemic.
Yeah.
And again, we sold this lie that postnatal depression is just something that is random. You've got a random chemical imbalance in your brain. We'll give you drugs and trot off. And don't bother us anymore. But of course, you know, most of the women I speak to who have postnatal depression, when I hear their birth story and when I hear how little support they've had through the postpartum period, when I hear how their breastfeeding was sabotaged by a society that doesn't value it and tells you all of the wrong things so it goes wrong, I think to myself, well, it's no wonder you're sad.
Yeah.
You've had an absolutely terrible time.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's something about birth or any sort of birth-related issues that does make you feel so incredibly vulnerable as a woman.
Yeah.
You know, it's obviously whenever we're unwell, whenever we're, you know, in hospitals or in institutions or in pain, you know, obviously we all feel vulnerable. We all need extra care and support. But there's something about it being related to the sort of womb area that is just so, I don't know what it is, kind of essentially part of you.
Yeah.
That, you know, when you're suffering in that region, and you know, it's the same for men or, you know, people who, you know, everyone in that region is a very vulnerable part of us.
Of course. And there's another person involved, isn't there?
Yeah.
You know, there's this
All
little
that anxiety
baby
about
that's
the
all
welfare of the person
Exactly.
you're giving life to
Yes.
as well at the same time.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I guess on that question of sort of agency, it's an interesting one because, you know, me and my cousin, who's also had a little boy, we made completely different decisions for the type of birth that we would have.
Yeah.
But we went through a very similar process of analysis, you know, doing the research, finding out what the potential risk, potential outcomes. And essentially, you know, my conclusion was, right, if I do physio, if I do my exercises, if I have doulas, if I think carefully about the environment, you know, I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I did. Yeah, I mean, you know, following all the sorts of instructions for how to make sure you've got maximum oxytocin, those types of things, then I'm giving myself the best chance. Even if it doesn't go well, at least I've controlled what I can control.
Yes.
And I've, you know, put the effort in to give myself the best outcomes. Obviously, other people do that and they don't manage to have a home birth. And, you know, that's just chance in a way, and that's nature as well.
Yeah.
We do have to sort of be humble about the fact we can't control nature.
No.
We can't dominate nature.
Mother Nature just has a different agenda for us sometimes.
And, you know, and as long as we come out healthy and the baby comes out healthy, you know, that's the important thing. But yeah, my cousin who, you know, similarly wanted to feel, you know, she was most guaranteed to have an outcome that she could predict and she could prepare for. She went down the elected cesarean route. And I think that she had a very positive birth experience as well, because just like I did hypnobirthing for natural birth and I went to classes and all that stuff, she did all the same thing for an elected cesarean.
Yeah.
And so her and her partner, you know, they were very prepared. They knew what was coming and they were in control and they could get their environment ready and they could have all the infrastructure in place for how to take care of her in that situation.
You're either end of a bell curve. You two.
Right.
The vast majority of people are stuck in the middle where, I mean, most hospitals now, 40, even up to 50% of women are being induced. We know that cannot be medically indicated, that half of us require for our labour to be artificially started and augmented in order for the babies to be born. If that was the case, we would have not populated the planet as successfully as we have. Something is happening that means that all of those women in the middle of that bell curve are having a labour experience that is statistically more likely to end up in a birth experience that they look back on with a cold sweat.
Yeah, because it's that cascade of interventions, isn't it? Once you start with an intervention, you're more likely to have others down the line.
Yeah.
And the other thing I remember learning is that the synthetic oxytocin that you get given to induce labour just has a very different effects in your body to natural oxytocin.
Exactly. It literally just contracts the muscle of your uterus. It doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. So the oxytocin that you were flooded with when you were in labour was in your brain. It was coming from your brain. It was giving you pain relieving properties. It was making you feel blissed out and stoned and not really aware of time passing, loved up. All of those things that helped natural labour feel doable. And then when Senna came out, huge wave of your natural oxytocin made you fall in love with him and started your milk flowing.
Yeah, and that
none of those things happen with artificial oxytocin.
And I think the other thing is that, people, when things don't go well, a bit like miscarriage, I think culturally we have a sort of emphasis on success. And we don't really want to talk about things that go wrong as, we could call them failures, but they're not failures. It's just nature,
That's right. As I said at the beginning of our conversation, I don't know why the narrative is so different and the logic is so different when it comes to maternity care. I mean, as you know, I've got cancer. I don't see that as a failure on my part. I know I need medical help.
Yeah.
But I also know that my mindset and other things that I do can help keep me as healthy as possible for as long as possible. This is not a binary debate that we need to have about natural birth versus medicalised birth. It's all about families navigating this in a way that feels safest and most satisfying to them, and we should have no judgment.
Yeah. So just to quickly jump to another very important topic, or popular and controversial topic, sleep.
Yeah.
So, a couple of things. The whole beginning of the doula movement came from the importance of women's practice of breastfeeding, being valued by the people around her, how important that is. And we know that in the UK we have, I think, probably some of the lowest rates of breastfeeding in the world.
The lowest.
Right, the lowest rates of breastfeeding in the world. So I think it's 1% of the population is still breastfeeding at 6 months. Is that it?
Yep.
Yeah. Obviously, when breastfeeding is not comfortable, it's not fun, you don't want to keep doing it.
Yeah.
But also most women have to go back to work. To be able to breastfeed a 2.5-year-old is also a luxury. If you're managing to be a full-time mum these days, it's not necessarily affordable for everybody. But it does seem a real shame that socially and culturally we don't promote the value of long-term breastfeeding. And so this is where we connect to sleep.
Well, it's sleep and breastfeeding are so connected.
Right.
You can't unpick the two, really. And, a breastfeeding family may well make very different choices about their nighttime parenting than families that are bottle feeding with formula. And a baby's sleep rhythm may well be different. But I think the whole, going back to what you were saying about our terrible breastfeeding rates, it's no coincidence that capitalist societies have dreadful breastfeeding rates, because there is an awful lot of money to be made from you not lactating. There is a huge investment in trying to persuade you that your body doesn't work and that your child will benefit nutritionally from this white powder.
Yeah.
And the way that white powder is marketed is very similar to the way that other white powders are marketed. It's a terrible, terrible system that we have very few laws around in the UK to regulate that marketing being able to drip feed its way into women's brains as a solution to their perceived problem with breastfeeding, and drip feeding this idea that our bodies won't work and we won't have enough milk. So this all happens for a reason. When you look at other countries like Sweden that have stricter rules, their breastfeeding rates are significantly better than ours, because those companies' unethical ways of working are stemmed.
Yeah, we do have a massive issue with regulating every corporation in our food system. I mean, all of our corporations, basically alcohol, tobacco,
Yes.
any unhealthy products.
There is absolutely
very
nothing
poor regulation. Yeah.
stopping them doing pretty much anything they
The
like.
constant talking about diabetes and the cost of the NHS. Oh, let's like give people pills that make them lose weight. Oh, let's not regulate whether chocolate bars can be at the till of a supermarket.
Yes, that's right.
Like
It's exactly.
let's not control temptation.
So formula industry is exactly the same. It's part of a bigger problem with unfettered capitalism.
Yeah, but also patriarchy, right? Like I had a very interesting conversation with a mum the other day in the park who said that she'd never tried breastfeeding. She'd always gone down the road of formula, and it was so expensive, and that her baby, then when he got to 1 year old, the baby still wanted formula. It took a while to get her off formula onto cow's milk. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Well, did you sort of not get on with breastfeeding, or did you have some pain problems, whatever? Because obviously it is very uncomfortable when you have problems. And she said, no, I actually didn't ever try, because she said, look, I've got no judgment to people who do breastfeed, but for me, it just felt really weird to have the baby there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like,
Because we have sexualised our breasts.
right. And I thought, wow, I'm sure there's many people that feel like that. I'm sure she's not, the only person. That essentially breasts have become so sexualized that they are, even women themselves feel that their own breasts
That's right.
are sexual objects.
I wish I could remember or find the study, because it was an anthropology study
Right.
that I read when I was doing my breastfeeding counsellor training, like 20 years ago. And they studied 98 cultures around the world. 13 of them had breasts as erogenous zones. So that means that the vast majority of cultures in the world see breasts as purely utilitarian. They're there to feed babies. They're not sexualised at all. So we're allowed to encase them in lace and show them off, as long as no nipples are showing.
Yes.
But as soon as there's a baby attached to them, suddenly it's disgusting.
Yeah.
There's a huge, weird dichotomy, what's going on in our brains as mothers in Britain, and beginning this whole breastfeeding thing. And also, often, if there's no pain and it's going really well, there's a nice feeling to it. And then women can feel really weird and guilty.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Because strange, you can't separate it in your mind.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's another one of those things that we don't talk about enough, is the fact that because our body literally produces the same hormone well, for breastfeeding in those early stages that we produce when we're having an orgasm.
Yeah.
You do have physiological feelings that you associate with sexual experiences. And so then, I was surprised that actually so many people had that feeling. Oh, this is weird. Why am I feeling aroused?
It's completely normal, but we don't talk about it.
But I guess one of the problems is, or not a problem, but from an anthropological perspective, it is very interesting how you have associations with phenomena. We give meaning to bodily phenomena.
Yeah.
And because we're so used to giving sexual meaning to phenomena in our bodies, even physical touch, that we then... it reminds me of this awesome essay by Audre Lorde about the erotic, I think it's called The Erotic as Power or something like that. I don't remember, but anyway, so that essay, which is on YouTube, you can listen to her reading it out, is talking about how we've been detached from the erotic in so many ways, and how the erotic is really all about that. It's about the sensual, about the physiological, it's about our essential humanity. Yeah. But we've cut ourselves off from it.
Yeah.
We've objectified it, we've sexualized it, we've commodified it.
Yeah.
And now the erotic is pornographic.
Yes.
And actually what that means is that men are also detached from their own emotional, physiological, spiritual being, because
we've put it in a corner, haven't we? So that's over there, and the rest of life has got nothing to do with that. And so then sensuality in every other corner of life, we don't understand it.
Yeah.
We can't understand what's happening in our bodies, and that. So all of those feelings you have as a new mother can become feelings of shame or confusion.
Right. I think we've done a really good job. We've had a lovely long discussion. So from Sheringham, we'll say a big thank you to Maddie, and a big thank you to all of the women who you've helped, both as yourself as a doula, but also all the doulas that you've trained. I think you've had an absolutely huge impact, and we probably will never be able to even have an idea of the quantity of impact. But you've definitely had a very, very big impact on my life and Senna's life and my family's life. So huge gratitude and appreciation of you and everything that you've done. So big hugs and lots of love. And thank you if you've listened this far, and sorry if we've offended you at any point. Okay, love to all the parents out there.